Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt.
And I'm Jadrian.
And we have a third guest with us. Brian O'Rourke is back on the podcast. Thank you, Brian.
Hey, it's great to be with you, and I'm getting hungry, Jadrian.
So, if you can hear my munching, I am eating an oatmeal cream pie because I need a snack before we do this.
I haven't had oatmeal cream pies since like 1991.
Yep. Yeah, it's been a while. Jadrian's coming straight from office hours right before an exam, so is in high demand and it worked up an appetite talking to students.
And that also means I'm very energized because I spent an hour and a half rapid fire answering questions. So I'm very excited to sit back and listen to Brian talk the entire time, and I will rapid fire ask him questions instead about what we want to talk about.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we can start with drinking. Jadrian, we'll let you start with your drink on this fine evening.
Sure. So I am in the office, so I am not consuming an alcoholic beverage, but the office paid for this. So I am drinking and I believe it's pronounced Perrier, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm drinking a sparkling water that we purchased for some seminar workshop or something. It is the lime flavor, if that matters, but nobody else is drinking them, so I drink seltzer water, so I'm happily drinking it.
And Brian, what do you have?
So it's getting to be fall here, so I thought, what's a good fall drink? So, nice. Well, where is it? There it is. So nice, proper cocktail glass here. This is a whiskey sidecar.
Ooh,
classy.
What is in a whiskey sidecar?
So I've got Jameson, simple syrup, an orange liqueur. It's supposed to be Cointreau, but we were out, and lemon juice. So
that sounds very good.
It is. I haven't had the sidecar for a few years, and I just thought, that sounds like a good fall. Going into fall.
It's sort of like a whiskey margarita. I mean, it sounds.
Is that a tequila?
I guess
triple set?
It's verging on that. No salt.
Right. Orange
no
liqueur
salt,
is
no lime juice, or
they're usually made with bourbon or brandy or cognac. The sidecars, but we got lots of whiskey here.
So I am having a Mad Tree. It is the Summer Camp Hazy IPA. Do either of you know the significance of this beer?
Hold on, Mad Tree Hazy. Where's it from?
That would give away some of the significance.
Oh no. But no, I don't know.
Brian, do you know the significance of this beer?
My guess is it has something to do with the murder camp movie, but
no, well, close. It spent some time in your trunk coming back from Cincinnati. So I bought a couple 6-packs of IPAs I'd never tried in Cincinnati. Didn't drink them there. And Brian, who drove them back to Pennsylvania, and when we visited, picked them up a little bit ago. So nice. It's from Jet Set, and spent some good quality time in your vehicle, Brian.
I took good care of it, really.
Yeah, I can tell.
So I appreciate that we have somehow continued the Jet Set theme even well past our Jet Set interviews. We somehow still have a little nugget of Jet Set staying with us.
Pretty soon we'll just be able to promote the next Jet Set conference.
So I hope we will be presenting preparing that, presenting it, and telling everybody about it very soon. I think it will be soon.
Cool. So today, so the title is Economics Happy Hour, which implies, happy topics. Of course, happy hour is also a thing at a bar. But given the recent kind of terrorist attacks in Israel and then the corresponding actions by their government and the declaring war on Hamas, Brian actually reached out and said, hey, something to talk about a little bit of economics of war. And, it's a massive topic. It could cover multiple textbooks, but maybe a couple for the listeners to go through a few things that we think about, or a few things the average person could keep in mind when thinking about how does war impact the economy. So that's the general idea I think we had today, Brian. I'm reading into your text message because yours was like, we should talk economics of war. And we're like, sure. But is that a good summary, or what else should we add to the
it's pretty good. I mean, I think, well, let me ask you all this. when you were in college, how insulated were you from what was going on outside of campus?
Well, hold on. Let me help here in the sense that I went to college. I graduated high school in 2005. So just a couple years after the Iraq War started, right? So like I'm not Gulf War One, but I guess Gulf War Two. So I will say I was aware of what was going on through sort of undergrad and grad school because I had friends who were serving in
Mhm.
Iraq and Afghanistan sort of at the same time. You know, past that, my knowledge of what was going on outside of campus was really sort of local related things. Like my undergrad was located in the area that they do capital punishment in Texas. So like I was aware of like the death penalty and like fights about the death penalty, but like I wasn't sort of nationally aware of what was going on with other stuff. So I'll say I'm a weird in between.
I went 94 to 98. I had a bunch of friends in like the Army Reserve, but that was a pretty piece. I mean, it was between the Gulf War and between 9/11 when I was in school. So I mean, I was kind of aware of things. So how about you, Brian?
Yeah, I the only thing I remember other than getting a newspaper to check, because when I was in undergrad, we had to go to the newspaper on Monday to do fantasy football stats. So that was the only time I'd ever pick up a newspaper. But I had a friend who was working at the radio station on campus, and I went into the just to say hi, and it was the day that of the Oklahoma City bombing, and that's the only thing I remember from off campus happening during my 4 years of undergraduate school. It was, all the teachers would say, you're living in a bubble, you're living in a bubble. And then this would have been probably the second week of teaching was 9/11. And I was teaching at James Madison at the time, and we had a ton of students from DC. And yeah, nobody had any clue what was going on really at the time. But I was a little more aware of what was going on as a teacher, but probably not that much more aware than what the students were as far as what was going on outside. I mean, it's a time in life where you are
Mm-hmm.
concentrating on your relationships on campus and you're concentrating on your studies. And unless there is something that directly impacts you, like you guys were saying, you had friends who were in the military. I mean, there's really no reason for students to be that connected to what's going on off campus.
Yeah. No, I
That's
think
interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
no, I think you're right, and I think that, I mean, to some extent, like issues with war came up, but even though I was an economics major, the pervasive myth that I would hear is that wars are good for the economy.
Oh,
That
interesting.
World War II got us out of the Depression, and
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's I was thinking about this, right? Because I was trying to prep of like, okay, are we going to talk about the broken window fallacy? Like, where are we going with this?
I
But then
think
I started thinking about this, right? Like that's what I was taught in macro. This idea that we had we had awful unemployment in the 30s, and World War II put everybody back to work and production, and sort of built our economy, and it became the future manufacturing of our economy, sort of the backbone. Right, other countries lost their production facilities, but
yeah.
we had ours. So the 50s and 60s and 70s, production was great because World War II helped us get there. So actually, I didn't realize it. I think I was taught basically that same story.
Yeah, and I don't recall if I was taught it in macro or it's just a pervasive myth. I don't think I was taught it in macro. I'm going to give a shout out to my, I think I got good macroeconomic education by Dr. Randall Waldron, who's no longer at South Dakota, but still teaching the youth of today. But why don't we start with the broken window fallacy and the idea that breaking a window is not good for society? Jadrian, you mentioned it, so do you want to give a quick definition, or if
I
you're
am so
laughing, so
bad
if you don't want to,
No,
then
I can do it. I don't know why. This is one of those econ concepts. I understand it internally, but every time I try to go and explain it, I somehow sort of get it backwards. But big picture, so it's a parable of the broken window fallacy. So it's this story of essentially, I don't remember exactly who like maybe it's a tailor or something. There's some business owner who opens a shop or owns a shop, and some heathen runs through and breaks their window, and they have to spend money to then rebuild that window. And sort of people who are looking on say, isn't that great? They've spent money to help a window producer now have a window. They have sort of stimulated the economy because they've had to hire somebody to replace the glass and clean it up and stuff like that. And sort of the broken window fallacy is this idea that destruction creates something. It sort of tells the counterfactual story that had that window not been broken, he would have had a complete window just like before, and that shop owner would have also had money to go do whatever else he wanted, like buy a new suit, and he would have created more output by buying a suit and having a fixed window, rather than the destruction just resulted in a complete window.
I think that's.
I know the story. I don't know that that's necessarily like the broken window fallacy.
I thought that was a great story, and
Yeah,
I mean the idea. Yeah,
you got the suit part right. That was good because
there's a glazer, right?
That's it. That's the person who benefits, and then it's the tailor who
I remember the parts of the
yeah.
story, right? Like
but the general idea is before you had a fully functioning window. The window's broken,
and you have one after, right? That's
yeah,
the sort of before and after.
So the window is destroyed, and people spent this effort to rebuild the window, where instead that same effort could have been doing something else. You could even take the economy out of it. I mean, if we want to take the economy part is like, oh, you bought something, so it shows up on GDP. But you have a window before, you have if you have a fully functioning window, that time and energy would have been to do something productive. So
the GDP part, I think, is what so many people grab onto. It's because, there is this production, and that's adding to GDP. And that's part of the problem with how we measure output in the economy, is that it's measured by producing something. It doesn't matter what's produced as long as something is produced. So we're not measuring, this poor person who now has to replace his window and can't buy his new suit. He would prefer to have bought the suit, but that's not what gets measured in GDP. So when a whole bunch of stuff gets broken, it's like, we have to repair it. And that means we have to produce it, which means GDP is going to go up, which is good for the economy. So that's the pit that, sort of, that is the fallacy that, we've made the economy better by doing all this destruction. So theoretically, we should just be burning things down all the time if we want GDP to go up.
Yeah.
Well, so I think when I first heard about it, and I'm going to go back to, I was in college in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit in 2006. And so I grew up outside of Houston, so sort of right next. Oh, it was 5.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was my freshman year or my sophomore year.
Yep. Yeah.
It happened when I was very young in college. Actually, you know what? Hurricane Rita, I think, is the one that hit Houston the year after. So there was this sort of double hurricane at the same time. But that argument was basically the hurricane hit, and look, New Orleans is so much better because we've now had to rebuild roads and houses, and we're all sitting there going, it would have been way better if the hurricane had not hit. Like, how are people making this argument? I think it helped because I was in the moment. Like, no, it's better. It would have been better if that hadn't happened.
Yeah.
And you hear these. I hear it in my work with like sports economics of building stadiums, and like, look at how great it is that we've torn down this dilapidated area and built something new. And it's like, well, yeah, but you could have done something else with it too. So I guess the idea of it's counterfactuals, and there's another phrase that's really popular in this space. And I don't ever remember what it is. Do you remember? Do you know, Brian or Matt?
I'm not sure.
The seen and the unseen.
Oh, the seen and the unseen. Yeah.
That's the phrase, right? Which is
that's
always tough.
That's the Bastier, right, Matt?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Asking me what famous authors said for quotes, you're looking at the wrong person on that, unfortunately. There are some things I'm good at.
We need to make a recommendation to you as far as reading material.
Yeah, there's some things I'm good at, and my knowledge
that's not one of them.
Great classic literature is not one of them, sadly. I think we'd all agree the broken window fallacy would imply if you destroy something, sure, it may show up that you're rebuilding it, and that part adds to GDP, but that those funds could have done something else. Therefore, you, of course, are not better off. Which, it's weird that we have to have this complex discussion for anything a 2-year-old should understand. No, don't break the glass. We'll be worse off. But we've had to have it because people have said that wars would destroy. But thinking back to World War II, our GDP did increase dramatically once World War II hit. And the unemployment rate did drop dramatically once World War II hit. And I think that's part of what throws people off. Now, I have thoughts on it that aren't related to the war itself. One is, I mean, that I'm happy to share, but everybody also had to live on rations, and if you're in the US, you're stuck eating whatever it is they allow you to eat. So you might be working.
Our rations were not as bad as the other rations.
Yeah, and the rations
pick your rations, Matt.
The rations you're eating are if you're here and not, of course, one of the millions of people who sent off living in total misery that is war.
And if you look at the distribution of what's being produced there, it's, consumption, the consumption pattern changes, and
guns and butter.
So it's so much more of the guns and not nearly as much of the butter. The government's taking over the economy, and honestly, governments do a really good job in producing things and diverting resources when there is a very clear objective. And they can really mobilize resources, but when that objective goes away, that's when we kind of take a look at government production and say, that may not be the best use of resources anymore.
The one part about World War II that I think did help the economy that carried over afterwards is I would argue, I will argue to most people that FDR was a terrible president in many, many ways. His leadership for the country on World War II, was mixed, right? It's tough for me to even give him credit for this when he then imprisons thousands of perfectly innocent Japanese Americans. But in some ways, right? And no, I can't even credit that. No, but so I know that. But anyways, there was such a war on firms and businesses in the 30s, between trying to impose new taxes, to trying to impose new minimum wages, to government trying to seize people's gold, so I think firms had no idea what to expect moving forward from basically the time FDR was elected until World War I started. They didn't trust anything that might happen, or World War II. Thank you, Brian. Once World War II started, the government basically told businesses, we have your back. We are there was essentially stable rules of the game, and those stable rules of the game carried over afterwards a little bit more. And so that was, to me, if you're looking for a positive impact, that was the one positive economic thing that came from it. It wasn't all of the guns instead of the butter, for the guns and butter analogy. I don't know. Appreciate both of your takes on my take.
I have a huge gaping hole in my post-World War II U.S. history knowledge, which is terrible because I was a history major. But that was like the class they never taught, was what happens after World War II.
Yeah. So okay, I'm gonna right. That's a course you should teach, right? The economic history after World War II.
Oh yeah.
Instead of teaching labor, maybe you should teach that course instead. Okay, so this is where maybe even after this, I'm going to have to dig in and start looking up stuff. So I was looking, while you were talking, I went to look at the MBER's recession dating cycles, because these are the pieces, and I think Matt and I may have talked about this in a previous episode, and if not, I'm happy to talk about it again. I think about all the stuff that I have learned since finishing grad school about economics and systems and macro. Man, I wish I realized these things while I was taking it, because I feel like I would have been so much smarter at all of the math and everything we were doing, that I just sort of better understand stuff. So I was looking at the MBER, like when recessions happened, and I do seem to remember, not when I was in school, I learned the whole, it pulled us out of the Great Recession or the Great Depression, and we're better off because of it. And I feel like it's only recently that I have sort of gotten into this like post-World War II history part. We had a recession, February 1945 to October 1945. Germany surrendered May 1945. So we had a little recession right towards the end of the war. And I feel like I remember these stories. We had another one in during 1948, 1949. I feel like I remember this story that basically sort of the war was winding down, and we weren't producing the same amount of, right? So it's sort of that GDP story. We weren't producing amount of stuff, and that sort of took us into a recession. And then sort of as everyone came back, we didn't have the right sort of mix of jobs and industries because we had this massive military production, but then we didn't have people to do it. And sort of it created this sort of double wave of recessions. And so I feel like those things get left out of that story, right? We talk about war ends up making things better, and then again, better in the sense of GDP, production, unemployment, and then we sort of like forget about like the things that happened right after it. That we sort of focus in on one time period, but not the other time periods instead.
I think that's interesting, and I need to look more closely at the data, but you also have to think about how much, and this goes back to your guns and butter, right? It's how much investment is not taking place during wartime because all of the resources are being used to fight a war. So those things get blown up and destroyed, and you make new ones, great, but you're not investing during that period of time. So in a few years, when the investments would have paid off, the investments that didn't happen are not paying off. And so you don't have that normal trajectory of GDP.
So this was a big chunk of my labor course. When I talked about sort of this idea of American manufacturing and how great it was, and everybody looks back to sort of the 50s, 60s, 70s and stuff. Like the big argument was basically the reason it was so great was not sort of the American exceptionalism that we talk about, but because basically Europe bombed everybody's production facilities. This idea of investment, right? So all of the German ones, the English ones, the French ones, those were just leveled. They had no production capacity. We were largely, except for some Alaskan islands and Hawaiian islands, we were largely unattacked. Our production facilities still existed. And so we were able to have that sort of dominance, not because of anything we had done correctly, right? So this idea of like, what could we have invested in instead and where would it have gone? But just sort of everybody else just bombed everything and ruined it and gave us a head start. But once they rebuilt it more efficiently, better sort of, they built things correctly for what they were actually using it for, versus us, we're sort of like rearranging stuff.
I don't know. I think I'd argue with that, given the
Which
US
part?
has grown. They rebuilt better. Largely just US GDP growth has exceeded Europe's GDP growth. Even in the past 20 years. So not even the right.
But here's what's wild, right? So we manufacture more stuff, right? We've always manufactured more stuff, right? It's not that we don't manufacture. It's that always sort of that labor versus capital manufacturing story of, why aren't we in the heyday of manufacturing? Like I had students who were doing this to me at Penn State. Why don't we have more manufacturing? I'm like, we make more stuff now. We make 3 times as much stuff as we did before. But a lot of that change has happened more recently, not in the 50s, 60s, 70s. We made those changes 70s, 80s, 90s, rather than like sort of, I guess, differences in when different countries made the changes.
Yeah. The recession it's tough to imagine if you just think in the abstract that we wouldn't have gone through a recession coming out of World War II. The idea of transitioning all of the major automakers from making tanks to making domestic automobiles, and the ammunition companies to shift away from that, and the electronic. Just thinking through the massive amounts of what industry was making to making new products. In some ways, I'm surprised the recessions were so short back then, because it was we would have had to have one. It was the entire economy. So I
wonder about that, Matt, because it's sort of the post-COVID era. We've seen that
it's like the reverse of the post-COVID.
Yeah, it's like all this pent-up demand when people couldn't buy anything during the war. Now, all right, the war's over, people are coming back, and man, I just want to spend money on something. And I don't want to buy anything related to the war, just produce something for me. And I assume that demand was such that it's going to minimize any impact of a deep recession, because manufacturing, they could produce anything and someone's going to say, hey, thank goodness it's not war related, I want to buy it. So consumption, that shift from government spending to consumption, and consumption such a big part of GDP, that can really mitigate the the
That's a
impact
fair
of that
point. That
recession.
might be why it was so short. I would have.
I would say the one at the end of the war was right. There's the one that's sort of right at the war, and then they've dated that as ending October 1945, so slightly after Japan surrenders.
Yep.
And then we're in expansion right after. So that's Brian's point, right? Expansion, and then in 1948, a recession. So maybe it is right. Just those couple years after coming back, I'm going to buy as much as I can, and then at a certain point, you're like, okay, wait. It's been 3 years since the war. I need to stop because like I can't buy a ton of stuff. And then you're back in a year-long recession.
Does that mean we're going to go through a COVID recession here and a recession too?
Of course we are. Yes, we're going through a COVID recession. We always get to recessions at some point. You can't avoid them. There's a business cycle.
Okay, so Matt, I did get this question, and maybe Brian can chime in and help. Going back to the war idea, right? So economics of war. We started by talking about broken window fallacy. The idea that you had a full window, it's broken, you've replaced it with the same thing. However, in some instances, you can improve things in that process. So you think about, right, like you maybe have a dirt road, 2 lanes, it's rebuilt and it's bigger. There are components, and I've always sort of wondered where this fine line is, right? There are components that are, well, some part of that is definitely broken window, but then some part of it is better. In a sense of, I mean, war is, it would be better not to have war, right? So I want to make sure I'm very clear on that before I accidentally say something incorrectly here. What are some potential improvements possibly that come out of this? Whether that is diplomatic relations, new state boundaries, new infrastructure, right? Like, is there what sort of places would we expect to see improvements upon what was previous after replacements and fixes?
Of a war in general?
Yeah, we'll go, Cons outweigh the pros. What are some things?
So I think maybe something specific out of World War II is that the U.S. relationship with Japan and Germany is significantly different. And part of that is when the U.S. goes to rebuild those parts of the world, they can inculcate those defeated parts with a different mentality. It's right. Capitalism is good. You don't need to take over the world. You can make your life better off by building things that other people want, and do it peacefully. And so you institute that kind of new world. And this is kind of a charged saying, but the new world order where it's war is not the way to do things. Yes, we just had a war, but let's be friends now. So if you can go into a country and not do what you did in the past, in the way back when you took over a country and said, this is, sort of the Genghis Khan type of approach to world.
I was thinking Reconstruction when you were starting to face.
Things, right? Reconstruction would be the same thing. Sure. So you go in and say, all right, we know you're going to put your own spin on this, but we want to be friends. We'll help you get things started, and then we're going to back off. So kind of I think the political, teaching a new political, new economic way of doing things.
Yeah, that's
what I was trying to get. I was trying to find what are these weird places that you don't think about that I don't want to say that war has to happen in order for. It would be nice if it could happen without a war, but
I don't want to get into military spending. I think we could do a separate episode just on that, and we're on. But there are, I think it was the Defense Department that funded some of the early research for the internet, right? No, there is the question of how much was spent, and if that money was in the private market, would things have happened first? But you could fund some. I seem to recall, and I could be wrong, but a lot of the GPS technology might have come out of Department of Defense funding initially as well.
So I think one of the things I remember always learning, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, the interstate highway system was sort of military in purpose. The idea that you had sort of, I feel like I remember
Eisenhower wanted people to be able to get away quickly.
To get away quickly, but also be able to land planes in different places. There's certain amounts that are flat relative to straight versus curves and stuff. But I remember there was sort of a military underpinning to the interstate highway system.
Yeah, my understanding it was just to get away quickly from a city if there was a nuclear war, literally. But
Okay.
that's what the other parts could be true.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was the Interstate Defense Act, I think was what it was called. So the no, I'm sure there are other things. I mean, you could argue it's job training for individuals, especially those who are only in a short period of time. Go in as 17-year-olds, maybe not the most disciplined, and come out and certainly ready to work a 9 to 5 job. And think, quite frankly, a
Hmm.
9 to 5 job sounds pretty darn easy after living military life for a few years. So that's, I mean, that's a big positive side effect. And, I think for a military friend, like my father served in Vietnam, certainly a shout out to the troops and thank you for your service. But what the skills you learn there certainly transfer to a number of
Hmm.
different industries.
There
I mean, I
is
guess
a
one argument, the World War II argument is, right, we had more women participating in the workforce previously. So taking people who had essentially no sort of, a lot of people who had no workforce training at all, getting workforce training all of a sudden. Um, it's sort of in that same vein, but right, slightly different.
Yeah, Brian, you were
Brian, were you
about
going
to
to say?
speak.
yeah. So there's the kind of the idea that if if you train people in how to use a gun and how to fight, there is a deterrent effect as well down the road. I think of my wife was just in
Hmm.
Switzerland, and she's the Swiss talk of they're talking about how great everything is in Switzerland, and nobody attacks Switzerland. I mean, the terrain is horrible. You're not going to, it's impossible to fight a real war in Switzerland because you're always either heading up or down a mountain. But everybody knows how to use a weapon. So, I mean, there is that. Now, the same thing as in Israel. Same kind of training occurred in Israel, but that didn't slow anything down here. But I mean, there is in large part, there is a deterrent effect of, hey, if I'm going to attack someone and everybody has a gun under the bed. That's sort of the
Yeah,
story that we heard in like social studies class in high school. You don't want to attack
actually.
Switzerland because everybody has a gun under the bed.
Well, and actually, though, I think the gun ownership in Israel is really slow.
Hmm. Okay.
I'd heard, I think I saw that on Marginal Revolution that it's under one of Tyler Cohen's predictions was this may increase the support for Second Amendment rights. That
Hmm.
was, he comes out with predictions on things, and you look back 5 years later, a lot of them are stunningly accurate. I think he's pretty good at figuring that stuff out. That's a good. I mean, the deterrence aspect's a good
Hmm.
aspect, right? If you have military spending, nobody has. I mean, no country has tried to do an invasion of the U.S. for quite a while. Of course, most other countries haven't been invaded either. But
Yeah. Yeah. So,
I don't
will
know.
you guys, when you teach, do you bring into the classroom current events? I mean, is this something that you would talk about in your classes?
I'm teaching game theory now. I didn't bring it up Tuesday. Um, I don't know that I don't know how much I'll bring this up.
I have hinted at it without actually talking about it. Um, Only in the sense that I'm teaching international trade this week in my
Hmm.
micro course, and one of the big components that I talk about is often you trade with your neighbors because they're closest to you, so it's cheaper, and that by trading with your neighbors it creates sort of a stable. So I have this conversation about like globalization helps keep things stable because you rely on other people. um, and then but even today I talk about this idea that then I say, but sometimes that isn't true, so I sort of hint at it, is that
Hmm.
sometimes it isn't true if you don't agree with them ideologically. And then I sort of talk about like why we don't trade or why we have protected trade, in the sense of like, so today actually I talked about national defense, right? You don't rely fully on another place because you need to have your own food, weapons, oil. So I have skirted around it. But I think any of my students who were aware of what's happening could connect the dots on what I was doing.
Hmm.
And if they weren't aware of what I was talking about, they sort of fully missed it. But anyway, I'm pitching it from the market standpoint, right? Be integrated with the other people, rely on them, and it forces you to work out your disagreements. If
Yeah.
you are separate from each other, then you have no problem fighting with each other because you don't lose anything.
Sure. And that's the kind of the 80s, 90s version of diplomacy of, hey, we want to all be friends. And the more we integrate with other countries, the less likely, presumably, military conflicts will be.
I do teach from Krugman's book, so that's
So I'll be doing I'll be teaching economic growth to the macro class here in a couple of weeks, and I will definitely bring up war. And I don't know how many of them are aware of what's going on, but just I don't know if Matt and Jadrian, if you're ready to do pop culture, but
yeah, it's probably time. I'm guessing our episode's already a little bit long, but
yeah. So I've got two pop culture references. One is really, really, really old, and one is relatively new. So whenever I teach economic growth, the first thing I do is I show a clip from the first Black Panther movie, the introductory clip of the Black Panther. So it talks about how, all right, this kid's asking his grandfather to tell him a story, and he tells him a story of Wakanda, and this meteorite from Wakanda, from space comes, lands in Wakanda, and everything, all this vibranium is affecting the plant life, and it changes the history of this country. And so they have this resource and Wakanda is this fictional country in Africa. They get this resource, and then they do this amazing presentation of, wow, Wakanda is super stable. They have this resource, and they're developing all this technology, and they're telling the story of everything that's going on around them in Africa. And it's all the slave trade and war and conflict, and how basically the suggestion there is that while everything is going perfectly in Wakanda, everything is falling apart around them. And because everything is falling apart around them, there's no growth in Africa. But Wakanda has this incredible economic growth, and it becomes the wealthiest country in the world that nobody knows about. The story that's told in that maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 minute clip is, I barely have to teach anything about growth after showing that clip. It's a magnificent 3 minutes.
Is that on Critical Commons or Media Economics Media?
It's on Critical Commons. It's on my website, comicnomics.com. So you can find it there.
I don't know that I knew you had that website.
Well, it's in its development stage, but
okay.
it is live, so you can find it there.
Awesome.
That is a tough title to type out.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to give you a World War II propaganda short film to tie it back all to the beginning. This is on the Econ Media Library. It is called Going Places. It was produced in 1948 as it's a propaganda piece to essentially sort of talk about the merits of free markets and free enterprise, and sort of realizing that if you just put your mind to it, you can be more productive and get to do the things that you want. So there's like this story of this boy who wants to be fishing, but his mom is making him go make soap so that they can have it. And then sort of while he's doing it, he realizes that if he just creates a new way of making soap, he can make the soap faster, and then he can go spend time fishing instead. And so it's like a really great sort of short piece, but it's sort of nice. I would say, like, in hindsight, it's very easy to talk about free enterprise and entrepreneurship and stuff. But the cool part about it is realizing the time period that it's produced, which is way more interesting. So it's right sort of at the end of World War II. It came out in 1948. So sort of getting this idea of, hey, we're the American economy, and we need to have this free enterprise. Businesses are coming back, create new things, that sort of stuff.
Awesome.
Really neat.
So it's on the Econ Media Library.
Okay.
All right. So my old one, let me give you my old one real quick, because this is my favorite episode of Star Trek, the original series. So way, way, way back. It's called The Taste of Armageddon. And what happens is the Enterprise shows up on, at a planet. They're like, hey, what's going on here? And there's these two neighboring planets, and they've been at war for 500 years. And the way the war works is it's basically war games. They launch a virtual war, a virtual attack. And so none of the capital gets destroyed. But if the citizens of the planet are where the attack took place, they must voluntarily submit to extermination. And so the capital is the reason the war can go on for so long is because none of the capital gets destroyed. They only lose labor, and it works. So of course the caveat in the story is that the Enterprise ends up getting hit by an attack, and they are ordered to send all of their crew down to the planet to be exterminated. And this is where Captain Kirk violates the Prime Directive, like he tends to always do. And like, we're not playing by these rules. We gotta show you what war is really like. And so they start. If I remember correctly, they actually blow a few things up to show them that if you continue this way of fighting war will be with you forever. But if you actually fight a war the real way wars are supposed to be fought, then you will realize how terrible war is, and you won't want to fight a war.
Interesting. You said War Games, and I completely forgot about this movie and how much I loved this movie when I was a kid.
Cool. Well, thank you, Brian, for suggesting the topic, and thank you to everybody who stayed with us for this little bit longer than normal episode. I don't know. We're recording this on October 11th. I'm not certain exactly when this will drop. But
or what has happened since the time that we recorded this. And
so
great point.
Forgive us if we've made some comment and then some ridiculous action happened since that may make us all look foolish. But
it has been it happened on Saturday, right? Yeah. Saturday morning.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's been
4
or 5 days since the first attack. So time frame, if you made it this far, we probably should have started with that at the beginning. Matt, maybe you should make a little introduction that says, hey, we only knew about this for 4 days.
Yeah.
Please forgive us for whatever's happened.
And if you enjoyed the show, once again, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review, and we will be thrilled to send you Economics Happy Hour stickers if you do so. We are also looking for sponsors, so let us know if you're interested in sponsoring. Yes. And for those on YouTube, Brian is showing off the Economics Happy Hour sticker, which I could show it off, but it's on the back of the laptop, which has the camera.
Well, I might have mine. So while you're doing that pitch, and also if you have any ideas, right? If you have topics that you want to hear us talk about, or you would like to hear us talk about it, you can also join us, just like Brian. We're happy to talk to you about all sorts of other things. We end up coming up with topics that we're like, we need to talk about this in a future podcast, and then we never talk about them. So if you've heard a topic we've mentioned, come talk to us about it. We're happy to talk to people too.
Absolutely. And well, thank you all for being here. And I'll raise my empty glass to you, and you can raise your Perrier and your whiskey something. Sidecar. Whiskey sidecar. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye, guys.